Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple.
Another upset in the 2022 World Cup, as Japan also came from a goal down to record a famous 2-1 win, thanks to goals by Doan and Asano, after a Gundogan penalty had put Germany ahead. Germany may have created more expected goals, but Japan's masterful second half adjustments must be commended. So what exactly were the tactics? Let's take a look. And a lot of you have been asking what software I use for my analysis, and it's called Once Video Analyzer Pro. And it's already pretty affordable, but I've teamed up with them to give any of you who want to try it a further 10% off by using the code FMS10. So visit their website through the link in the description below if you're interested. This was truly a game of two halves, as in the first half, Germany had 81% possession and 14 shots compared to Japan's 1 shot. And in the second half, Germany's possession dropped to 66, whilst now Japan had 11 shots, thanks to Moriyasu's brilliant tactical adjustments. So let's dig into the first half. Germany had a lopsided shape in the build-up, with Süle remaining out wide but fairly deep, whilst on the other hand, Raum had the responsibility to push high up on the left-hand side. That meant, on the right-hand side, it was up to Gnabry to be the main provider of width for Germany. However, with Raum having moved high on the outside, and now Musiala could drift in alongside Müller and Havertz to operate in these regions where he much prefers, rather than the wide area. And in the first half, Japan didn't mind this too much, as they were happy to be much more passive, sitting in a 4-4-2 with Kamada often pushing up alongside the forward, so that it looked like this. And at times, it almost looked like the forwards were man-marking the pivots, in order to allow their central midfielders to keep their eyes on Musiala and Müller wherever they went. And this was helped by the fact that neither Rudiger nor Schlotterbeck were particularly adventurous with their passing, so Japan were happy to give them some space on the ball at times. However, when they did begin to advance, Japan also used a piston system, where one forward would press a centre-back, with the other remaining deeper, looking to cover both pivots, or, if they could not, a midfielder would at times commit onto the second pivot. Here we see an example of Japan's 4-4-2 with the two forwards leading the line, but looking to sit on the Germany midfielders. And at times, one of the forwards could then look to push onto a centre-back, and this would be the trigger for one of the midfielders to push up onto the second pivot. So initially, with Raum being high on the outside, if Japan did look to press with both of their centre forwards, Süle would be the obvious outlet down the right hand side, and he could receive the ball. However, Kubo could be aggressive in pressing Süle, as he is not the best on the ball, so if he got there before Süle could settle, it would either force him backwards or into a rush pass. And Japan did see Süle as a press target, especially if one of the forwards was covering the midfielder who looked to come across to support. But in the first half, Germany began to have success in a few different ways. Japan's forwards were highly reactive to the movement of the Germany pivots, so what we began to see was more of Kimmich or Gundogan dropping in to pick up the ball, as firstly they had more progression ability than the centre-backs, but this would also draw one, or at times even both of the forwards into the press. Either way, with this temporary 3, this would now provide the option for Gundogan to receive, and if the midfielder then looked to press him, Musiala or whoever was between the lines could receive. Alternatively, the wide centre-back would now have even more room in which to push up on, and then look to combine with the man between the lines and Raum or Gnabry depending on which side the ball was. So here, Gundogan is able to pick up the ball. This now draws both of Japan's forwards towards him, and we can see that both Schlotterbeck on the outside as well as Kimmich now have a little bit more room. So now when Schlotterbeck receives, he draws the winger out of position, and we can see that he has options as both Kimmich is now free with the forwards having been drawn onto Gundogan, as well as the potential of playing it to Raum or Musiala, who has a little bit more space in the midfield, because Japan's midfielder now has two men to be concerned about. When Raum receives, Musiala can now attack the space behind the fullback who is looking to confront Raum, leading to a much more dangerous situation. Sensing some weakness in Japan's shape, Germany looked to adapt, and this was firstly by now switching to a dedicated back 3, with Süle, rather than being deep right all the time, now moving in to be a genuine centre-back, and he and Schlotterbeck could move higher outside the pressing 2 of Japan's. This made matters much more difficult for Japan, as if they were still looking to use their piston pressing, with one forward pushing forward, and a pivot covering the remaining men, Germany would now have two options to find outside of the press, and Sula in particular saw a lot of the ball. Earlier on, when Sula was in these positions, by default, Kubo could easily press him. However, it took a while for Japan to adapt, so even when Sula received here, Kubo would still look to press, but now the wide passing lane wouldn't be covered as it was when they were both wide. As a result, Gnabry could drop in to receive, often with Muller pushing into the right half space, making it much more difficult for Nagatomo to know who to pick up. And now, Gnabry could look to drive forward and combine with the men between the lines. Now Germany are in a dedicated back three, with Sula operating deeper and wider. And we see that Kubo is already ready to make the movement to press him. But when he does, Muller, who has rotated with Gnabry, can now receive on the outside, as the passing lane is not cut off. This now means Muller has room in which to drive forward and look to combine with men, the wrong side of the Japan defense. And high up the pitch in general, Germany operated with this front five, with Havertz often looking to receive and then play war passes to the men who would be providing him easy options between the lines so that they could then combine further. And Musiala in particular was a danger. But with all of the front three being positionally flexible, as well as the pivots looking to support, Germany could often overload one side of the pitch. And this would often see the Japanese defense being dragged to one side. As a result, Raum had a lot of room on the outside, and this led to many dangerous situations and even the penalty for Germany. Germany were very willing to overload one side of the pitch, and the Japan back four has been dragged to one side of the pitch, meaning that Raum is free on the outside. One thing to note in this situation is that Musiala has also come across, which means that Ito has less to worry about. But in a very similar situation, where the Japan back four has been dragged across, this time Musiala is in the left half space, meaning that the Japan winger has one eye on him, as well as the fullback. This now means that Raum has a lot of space, which he can look to attack, and this leads to the penalty. It should be noted that even in the first half, Germany did look weak at times, especially in the transition, as with the Japan midfielders deep and looking to compress the space between the lines, Gundogan, or Kimmich as well, could drive extremely high up the pitch. So, when there was a turnover, Japan were immediately running at the Germany backline. But what exactly changed in the second half to make this a completely different match? Well, it was both the shape and mentality of Japan. When the first half it was a 4-4-2, where they would only confront Germany either in the midfield or in their own third, in the second half that was completely different. Tomiyasu's introduction meant that Japan could now switch to a dedicated back three, using wingbacks as well as a front three. On top of that, they now began to press Germany much higher up the pitch. And with Germany still using the same system, assuming that Japan would play the same way, were vulnerable, as now Japan literally went man-to-man against their centre-backs. And where before we saw Gnabry dropping in and able to combine with men between the lines, now Japan's own wing-backs could go man-to-man against the Germany wing-backs, making even this less effective. This was also topped by Gundogan and Kimmich now being tied up man-to-man in the midfield, and as a result, more often Japan were able to win the ball high up the pitch. So here, Japan are pivot to pivot in the midfield, their winger is ready to press their wide centre-back, as is this winger, whilst Rudiger is also picked up. And this shape continues, again, wide forward picking up the wide centre-back, and the wing-back can push up onto Germany's full-back, whilst they go pivot to pivot as well. It should be noted though that in being braver, Japan were also much more vulnerable on the transition, as where before they had their front two and two central midfielders much deeper, making them hard to counter, now it was only the midfield two. So at times Germany were able to have much more joy if they were able to get past this midfield protection, particularly with excellent attacking midfielders and exploiting the space in Musiala and Muller. But one tactical tweak wasn't going to be the end for Flick, so Germany actually switched back to their traditional back four for a while, with the purpose of this being firstly to outnumber the front three, so that if a man came in central to help support the press, then a fullback would now have more space. Japan's shape also now meant they were much more vulnerable in the midfield, as they only had a 2, so Germany could either play with a 3 or a 4. But Japan also quickly adjusted to this. Now, instead of a front 3, using a front 2, again still allowing them to apply pressure directly onto the centre backs, and one forward now dropping in to help cover one of the pivots so that they weren't heavily outnumbered in the midfield. So now Germany temporarily switched to a more traditional back 4. And this shape by Japan allows them to pressure both centre backs still as they hunted to get the ball back much quicker, whilst allowing one man to remain deeper on the midfielder so that it was a 3 versus 3 still. It also made Japan much more difficult to deal with on the ball. In the first half, Germany were much more comfortable pressing Japan, as Havertz and one of Musiala and Muller could pressure the centre backs man to man, whilst the other looked to tie up Endo, who tended to be the deepest of the pivots. At the same time, the fullbacks could be covered by Gnabry and Raum as they switched to a back 3 in the defensive phase. Muller looks to tie up a pivot, Musiala and Havertz can press the centre backs, whilst Gnabry then can pick up the wing back. But now, with the back 3, Germany found themselves much more vulnerable in the wide regions, as if a wide centre back was found, the wider man, whether Raum or Gnabry, would have 2 men with whom to contend. In addition, higher up the pitch, Japan also now had a front 5, much like Germany did when they attacked. However, with the front 3 being fairly narrow, whether it was a 1-2 or a 3 like this, Japan would still have success when they were able to find their wingback, as with Gnabry not being a traditional wingback, or even tucked in to help the press. It would mean that Sula was often 2 versus 1 down, and Japan could make runs into the half space where they could then look for the cross, which was very fruitful for them. Germany are once again pressing with a narrower front 3 against Japan's back 3, so the man outside can receive. So now Sula is dragged out of position to confront him, allowing Minamino to make the run into the half space, where he is then found, and his cross is parried by Neuer, allowing Japan to eventually finish. Overall, it's a result that will have the warning lights flashing for Germany, as a loss against Spain in their upcoming match, who looked impressive against Costa Rica, would see them all but knocked out already. Japan are now in a great position to qualify and will be hoping to get a result against Costa Rica in particular. For the managerial tactical scores, Flick's tactics weren't bad at all, creating plenty of chances, and the match could have been buried much earlier, earning him a 7. However, Moriyasu's adaptability, after taking in first half data, means he earns a 9. But what are your thoughts? Drop them down below.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you might enjoy the content available on my Patreon. Not only does Patreon help to support the continued production of content, as I am a one-man team, but it also gives you early access to videos that will come on the channel. You'll also get exclusive videos, get to vote on polls, and so much more. And it's cheaper than ever, no longer having a tier system, so everyone on the Patreon gets access to all the content. So head over to patreon.com/footballmadesimple to check it out.
And a special thanks to my latest patrons, including Justin Robinson, 12, Bagat, Konstantinos and Cesar.
But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.